Alright, it's all... And... Hello everyone, you are listening to Radio Free Eskippakithiki. I am Siege the Day, better known as Charles Altendorf, better known as the chair of the Libertarian Party of Kentucky. And I'm joined here with my co-host Geoff Sebesta.
Hello.
And we have some special guests here today. You all just want to briefly say who you are before I play all the intro stuff.
I'm Artie Bates. I'm from Letcher County.
All right, and Judah?
Yeah, I'm Judah Schept. I'm from here in Lexington. I'm a professor down at Eastern Kentucky University.
Oh, he went down to the wrong side of the river to teach. All right, we'll play our intros and then we'll get set up here. Hold on. Oh. All right, and we're back here. All right, how do we do this? Who goes first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third.
We have 2 hours to solve Kentucky's over-incarceration problem. So if anybody has any ideas, if anybody can give us a hint, you can call 859-257-WRFL, which is, we love to hear from you. And also, what else do we always say? Big shout out to all the DoorDash drivers and Uber drivers, because I think that's who most of our audience is. That's
your guess of who are... no... Clearly, the audience is my sycophants from across the nation.
You do bring a fan group with you. I'm not going to lie. You actually do. You have all these libertarians. They have no free will. They have to listen.
And if you think there isn't an over-incarceration problem, I would love to hear that defense. I mean, we will air it.
Intellectual curiosity. I will take notes and I will write that down. If you think more Kentuckians need to be in jail, what percentage of Kentucky is in jail right now?
Like percentage of the population that's in jail? I mean, nationally, it's about 1 in 100 Americans. And I don't know that particular figure for Kentucky, but we have the 7th or 8th highest rate of incarceration in the United States.
Ouch.
So there's a lot of us.
I know in Clark it's like 1.5% of the population is in jail or under the direct supervision of the jailer at any given time. That's not counting everybody that's out. That's just everybody that's in the system at any given time, which is, by the standards of civilized nations, somewhat shocking.
Quite high. Quite high.
Unusual.
Very high.
Yeah.
Our numbers approach like African dictatorship levels. And stuff.
No, we're past them. We're past everybody, right?
Yes.
We're the largest incarcerator in the world.
We win.
Yes.
Yeah.
We won that one hands down.
All right. Well, that's a good way to segue into intros. I guess, who's on my left here? I'm bad with names.
Artie Ann.
Artie Ann, you want to just give us a little spiel about who you are and what you're doing here?
Yeah, I'm a doctor down in Letcher County, a psychiatrist, and also a member of a citizens group called Concerned Letcher Countyans that is opposing Representative Hal Rogers' plan to build his 4th federal prison in the 5th District. So for about a year and a half, I've been very involved with that, and we're also part of a national group. And I think our goal is to educate people about the facts of the matter. And some of those facts are, as y'all are talking about, Kentucky being such a high state for prisons. This is particularly a federal prison, not a state, and there's a difference in that. But so it's federal dollars, which means everybody's tax money in the country, and already the 5th District, which is southeastern Kentucky, about 29 counties, population of about 700,000, has more federally incarcerated people than the entire state of New York, which has 19 million people. So one more prison is probably not going to fix the problems that we have economically, environmentally, because of 70 years of strip mining and 150 years of deep mining.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm here.
Judah, would you like to introduce yourself? And then I do have questions to circle back to, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I love listening to Artie. So I'm Judah. I'm a part of the same broad coalition that Artie Ann and Concerned Letcher Countyans is a part of. We're called Building Community, Not Prisons, organized specifically to challenge the prison that Artie Ann was referring to, FCI Letcher. I'm also like a scholar of mass incarceration, so I had a book come out a couple years ago called Coal Cages Crisis, which looked at precisely this sort of phenomenon, the rise of so many prisons and also jails in central Appalachia, generally in eastern Kentucky specifically. So there's 16 prisons in the region. Half of those are in eastern Kentucky. Most of those 16 are built just in the last 3 or 4 decades. So there's a lot happening there. There's kind of a lot to unpack and a lot to organize against. And kind of the crux of that opposition right now is the Letcher prison.
Man, that's crazy. Do you have anything you wanted to say, Geoff, before I start rolling?
No, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess the first question probably all of our audience would ask, the ones who don't read up much on this stuff. Why so many prisons?
That is the question.
That is indeed the question. Well, it's sort of is a progression that started with things like the war on drugs. I guess that was during the 70s. And 3 strikes you're out, and these harsh sentences, which are very popular politically, but then the people who've messed up and gotten in the, in wrong place, wrong time, did the wrong thing, didn't have enough family support at the time or whatever, or people who did, hate crimes all the way, the whole spectrum, end up then being the responsibility of if it's federal, Bureau of Prisons, if it's state, then it's each particular state. But mandatory minimum sentences, those kinds of things have led to more harsh sentences and longer sentences, so people are being kept longer. And I'm not sure that there's been that much focus on how we rehabilitate people, because statistically, most people who commit a crime do it in adolescence and their early 20s, which is a time that intervention has been shown to make a difference. Early child programs, adolescent education, employment programs have been shown to help people not get to that point. And the brain is still developing up to age 24. It's still pruning itself. So a lot of times people are just idiots. I mean that as a mom,
that's true,
as
yeah.
a mother. They're just doing something stupid. Breaking in somewhere or stealing things or doing drugs. And I'm not trying to minimize.
But is that what's getting people in federal prison? Because these are
federal is If I take an ounce of marijuana and cross over into Virginia, I've committed a federal crime.
So that's what's going on here.
Right.
Like,
Well, that's a lot of it. Yeah, like 40% probably, something along those lines.
Yep.
And then also. Internet pornography, child pornography, that kind of stuff is federal. Murder, statutory crimes are state.
Yeah.
Rape, that kind of thing. But some of those can still, like Jeffrey Epstein was in a federal prison.
Yeah. Well,
He
he
was-
was, I would hope,
he was doing
as a
something
special case.
Yeah, right. So there's a difference in those crimes.
Yeah.
Now, are most of these prisoners in our federal prison, are they from other states? Or is they...
Yeah. The Bureau of Prisons has, I think it's a 500-mile radius. So, for example, to be locked up in eastern Kentucky, you could be from as far east as, I think it's Baltimore, D.C., and as far west as Memphis, which, of course, creates, a huge hardship on the people who are incarcerated and their family members who then have to travel up to whatever that is, 700-800 miles. To a place that doesn't have very many hotels and just basic amenities for people to to sleep in or eat at or whatever when they're visiting.
God bless Letcher County, but do you all even have a hotel?
There are some Airbnbs, yeah, and we used to have a Super 8. We have one, Parkway Inn. Yeah, I think we just have one. So.
Yeah.
But these other counties where there have been federal prisons placed, which is Martin County, Clay County, McCreary County, also have not seen some boom, some economic growth, more hotels. They've just not seen that because a lot of times, people who are incarcerated
don't have a lot of money.
Exactly. People who are incarcerated are more likely to have less education than people who are never incarcerated, more likely to have lower income than people who are never incarcerated. Yeah. And their families actually spend a lot of money just making sure they have cash for the commissary and phone calls and emails, all of which are charged to the person who's incarcerated. So it's it almost promulgates poverty prison.
Well, it seems to preclude any opportunity for rehabilitation, right? Like that's just
Well, and
completely out
the
window.
phone call one was a particular scandal, if I remember. It came out, wasn't it in the Herald Leader or somewhere?
Are you talking about just a couple days ago, or
No, like last year. It was during COVID because then people noticed, oh, hey, it cost people like $2 a phone
yeah.
call. That's a lot for somebody in jail.
Yeah, some companies charge exorbitant
Yeah.
rates for people to call their loved
Yeah.
ones, which is why this radio show that's based at WMMT Apple Shop that we were talking about before we hopped on the air is so important,
Yeah.
where they
Yeah.
send broadcast messages from loved ones on the outside to their family members incarcerated in, I think, 7 or 8 prisons that are within the listening range of WMMT on the inside.
I mean, I'm not even sure what role rehabilitation plays here at all, because it sounds like 40% of them don't need any rehabilitation, and the other person, it gets really like I hate to open the can of worms of like what's required to rehabilitate a pedophile on the air. Like that's a really complicated question.
Yeah, that's
But-
true, and there are programs specifically for that. But
Yeah.
Judah can probably answer this better than I can. But I think rehabilitation can vary from prison to prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While the Bureau of Prisons is responsible for everyone who's federally convicted,
Yeah.
there's still a lot of variation from one prison to another, and some of, like for example, some of them, while all of them are supposed to offer medication assistance for opioid use disorder, the Marshall Project did a study in 2022 and found that I don't know, like 17% weren't offering hardly anything, and it varies based on the attitude of the staff. So. Also, the Bureau of Prisons is very short. Like they only have hiring up to about 80%. They only fill about 80% of their slots for mental health therapists, social workers, physicians. They're supposed to provide those services, but they have a real hard time staffing them. So that limits how much rehabilitation someone can have as well.
No,
I
do you-
also
do you-
just
oh, sorry.
no, I was just gonna say, I think like your original question is why do we have so many prisons, right? And I think to me the issue, I mean, of course we should think about
in
like
Eastern Kentucky. In
right.
particular,
I mean,
seems
to
an
me-
inordinate amount for the amount of population. Let's be honest.
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly. And I think the answer is sort of embedded in the question in a way. Like we should be concerned about what happens on the inside, of course, like your question, Geoff, about rehabilitation. But the reality is like we've invested for 4 decades into building out all this capacity in prisons and jails. As we've been putting more and more people in for all the reasons Artie was talking about, 3 strikes, mandatory minimums, the war on drugs.
Right.
And so to me, the prisons and the jails are a response to 2 crises. One is the crisis of mass incarceration, clearly, right?
Yeah.
The other, though, that we were just kind of circling around is the crisis of just like the political economy of Central Appalachia, right? The prisons are proposed, if you like look at how they're talked about, they're not really talked about necessarily in terms of dealing with the drug war, criminalization, whatever. They're talked about as like a jobs program or a way to like extend infrastructure, to repair a sewer line, to build a water treatment plant.
That is
very real needs of people in Eastern Kentucky.
No, but that's exactly how they discuss it. I watched.
That's exactly how
Well,
they discuss
I'll
it.
even do you one better. If you drive out on Leestown Road, I don't know if it's still up there now, but there was a sign up that said, whatever, I forget, it's got some special acronym now that's not just called
the
federal.
FIC or whatever.
Yeah, it said,
medical prison.
and then it was like $23 an hour, come work here.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
that's
You
as
gotta hire.
blatant as you can get, and that's quite extreme. Like,
Oh, yeah.
think, oh, hey, we're just advertising for more prison guards on the...
They absolutely like project, like Hal Rogers presents this as a jobs project. Like
100%.
Letcher County will get 300 jobs out of this.
Correct.
But if they can't even support a hotel, then obviously this is not trickling down very far. Like there's no.
And the Bureau of Prisons is understaffed nationally anyway.
Yeah.
They have 122 prisons, and in September, the director, Colette Peters, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, because that's about as much oversight, would you agree, as the
Yeah,
BOP has.
I think that's right.
And she even said that currently they're staffing at 88%. So that still leaves, I mean, if you average it out, about 30 to 40 vacancies per prison. And so if they can't staff the 122 prisons they already have, how are you going to staff another one in a more remote area than a lot of the others are? It is so preposterous. Plus, our county is still, our region is still recovering from the flood of July 2022, and we're one of the 2 counties that has been identified as the nation's largest hidden flood risk. our county and Buchanan County, Virginia, which is just over from Pike County,
Yeah.
so close together, are at highest risk for inland flooding. And so this would be a $500 million federal building that would be placed in one of the two counties with the largest hidden flood risk, because we have these narrow hollers, and we have more precipitation because of the climate crisis.
Yeah.
I not to derail it, but just to make sure everybody gets this one point that I caught there from you. You said there's 122 federal prisons, and there's 5 of them in
Yes.
eastern Kentucky.
Yes.
And we are the
This will be the 5th.
and this would be the 5th, and we as a state are 37th in population, I believe, or something like that.
Yeah, around there. Yeah.
Yeah, so this and that's only 1/4 of the state we're talking about.
Actually,
That's
that
wild.
leads to a question I've
Yep.
always had. I wonder if you can, like, do these people count as population on the census?
They
So-
count as residents of the county in which they're incarcerated.
But they don't get to vote.
Correct.
Oh no,
So this is-
gosh no!
this is
People
vote farming
they don't
in
want
a very
people in
profound
jail
sense,
voting.
yeah.
Prison
Okay.
gerrymandering.
It's
possibly.
called
Yeah,
prison
it
gerrymandering.
really, that is directly
Well,
what it is.
And,
Yes.
and another way to look at this, as Judah mentioned, the Bureau of Prisons divides the country into these regions, and we're in the Mid-Atlantic region, which is 7 states plus D.C. So from Delaware to North Carolina, as far west as the Western Kentucky and Western Tennessee. And so the 5th District, which is this little clump in southeastern Kentucky,
Yeah.
700,000 people, has 2% of the total population of this whole Mid-Atlantic region by BOP
Yeah.
designation. But we have 22% of the federally incarcerated people. Just
That,
in
that
this
that's
month
that's the
area.
stat I would that
There it
just
is.
shocks
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
It's just
There it
wild.
is.
That is so wild to think about.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder how much of this is on purpose. Like I always.
Oh, it's
wonder about
100%
stuff like
on
this.
purpose.
No,
by-
I mean, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I can't read their minds. Like, okay, you know, down in Richmond, how like Richmond has a shopping mall, like every
Yeah.
big town, and the shopping mall's completely abandoned, like every
Yeah.
big town.
well,
in Richmond,
Fayette
they-
Mall isn't totally abandoned
They
yet.
changed
but
the Real ID laws so that if you want your driver's license anywhere around here, you have to go to Richmond
Right.
to get it.
Yeah.
And then
Or
they
Frankfurt,
put the office
yeah.
in the mall.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, so they are legally
I see.
forcing people to
Yeah.
go to the mall. Like, and
Yeah.
you do see stuff like that. And like, I mean, even though the numbers are small, like 300 people here, 300 people there, I do think that this is a little bit about maintaining population levels because it's politically efficacious.
Well, there would be 1,408 incarcerated people in the prison.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
300
yeah.
people who would work there. It's
300 people would work
1,400
there.
people.
But
who
I
would
think
be-
one... I
That could be a
you were
stunt by
trying to say
Hal
something a minute
Rogers
ago,
to-
Judah.
Oh, I don't know. The one thing
Entrench
that
himself.
one of the things that comes to mind when just thinking about like prison-based gerrymandering.
Yeah.
One of the more recently completed federal prisons is up in Martin County, like like where Inez is. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
east of Prestonsburg, and there if you look at the census. It looked like that county had grown. That county's African American population had grown by
brutal.
800 people
Oh, God,
in the
that's
span of
brutal.
a decade in a county of maybe 20 or 25,000 people. And if you dig a little bit deeper, I did this as part of
Yeah.
my research for this book, you realize almost all of those folks are people who are incarcerated at what's called
That's
USP,
terrible.
United States
I
Penitentiary.
bet you what they'll
Exam.
do is get ready for the cynical used to work in regional government, graduated with a geography degree take. But you know what they'll do now is then they'll use that as some ridiculous excuse to apply for a diversity grant or something.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be
No,
surprised.
Actually, Martin County has 11,000, so it's much smaller.
Much smaller,
Yeah,
yeah.
much smaller.
Wow,
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
10%. No, that's
Yeah.
more than 10%.
That's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah,
That's so
yeah.
crazy.
Oh, and I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I've
I didn't mean to
monopolized our
interrupt.
guests. Go ahead.
Are these prisoners under the supervision of the Letcher County jailer?
Okay.
So he's just like ridden out.
The Letcher County Jail is its own separate complexity
Yep.
Yeah.
because it's at 200% capacity.
Right, yes.
And as are a lot of county jails because the cost, Judah can address this, the cost of incarceration is fairly high, and so it's cheaper to put some of these state and some federal
Yeah.
Correct.
incarcerated people, although none of them are in the Letcher County Jail,
Right.
out into these county
Yeah.
jails and city jails, and then they get paid a per diem, which helps them with their low.
Financial troubles.
Financial.
Yeah.
And
Get
then
a lot
and
more
then
money
on
too,
top of
yeah.
that,
That's right. They
we're
get
one
nice
of the
prisoners.
few
Yeah,
states in America that still we don't have any statute of limitation on felonies.
On anything.
So, you know, you could have done something 30 years ago,
Yeah.
and if you make the wrong enemy, suddenly you're you're one of the population now.
Not only does that happen, anybody who tells you it doesn't happen is wrong. Like there's a lot of people in well, you work at the don't you work at the College of Law Enforcement?
It's called the yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you know
He doesn't want to admit to it on the radio. I'm kidding.
Is that still happening as much as it was happening like 10 years ago, where they were like, because they modernized the system about 10 years ago, and they went through and they arrested a bunch of people on warrants from the 70s and the 80s. Yeah.
Huh.
But I mean, this is state, and
Yeah.
I mean, we're sort of
It's getting down a
state in
rabbit
general.
hole. But
I mean,
my point only is, of course,
Yeah.
is that, it's like you said, it's a mass incarceration scheme almost.
Yeah.
And it's wild. It's a wild scheme, and it's particularly bad in this state. And
It's just that I think what we're speaking to is just that jails at every scale,
Right.
federal prisons, state prisons, jails, incarceration has become the sort of singular solution to any social problem, right?
Right.
Mental illness, substance abuse, poverty,
Right.
unemployment, revenue decline, all of which are occurring in all of our communities, including counties in eastern Kentucky. And the solution has become, put people in jail to bring in revenue, or build a prison to provide infrastructure or offer jobs. Like, that has become the singular solution, because that is the sort of capacity of the state that we have invested in so heavily since, you can periodize it differently, but since at least the, mid to late 1970s.
And we've been a little critical of certain aspects of policing on the show, but one thing most people from the policing side of things would agree with is they don't want to be the enforcers of mental illness either.
yeah.
And it's really unfortunate. It's
Well, I
just
mean,
totally
that's the
unfortunate.
problem is when we start talking about it, we start talking about all the ways this can be avoided, and we're not taking any of them. Like, none of there's really nothing being done.
Yeah.
There's diversion programs,
Right.
but that doesn't really help. It really seems like these are federal prisoners, and it seems sort of random.
Right.
Like, it really just seems like okay, like we know that Biden's pardons didn't really get anybody out of jail, right?
No.
Because it was only for people that got simple possession of marijuana,
Right.
and anybody that gets arrested for anything gets a penalty, a bunch of charges. They
Right.
throw everything in that, and they can't at a time. So that didn't help anybody or do anything. I don't know.
But yeah, I guess if
Nightmare
I don't know, if we want to circle back to the initial question, so why our guests are here is a very good, something we really need to talk, I think a lot of people don't understand, is how these prisons are getting placed, and just how terrible some of this site selection is, and what is going on here. So would you like to expand upon that, either one of you?
Yeah. You want to go for it?
Well, I was just going to say, too, our population in Letcher County has declined by about 14% in the last 12 years. Coal is on the way out, and so there's, as you talk about extensively in your book, Judah, this vacuum, and people are worried. And I honestly believe that a lot of the folks who are in favor of this prison, I mean, I believe they want what's best for Letcher County, just
Yeah.
like I want what's best for Letcher
Absolutely.
County. But they're
Perfectly sincere.
told things like 300 jobs, and I think it sends a message that the minute the doors open, 300 local people get to have a job, which is far from true. And if you press them, they will eventually say, well, sure, there'll be transferees in at first, because you have to have people who know how to run a prison. Another thing they're told is prisons are a recession-proof form of employment.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they're told these things as if this is the little economic engine, when some areas of the country have found that it's negative economic growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely
expand
true.
upon that a little bit for us,
Yeah,
Judah, since you
sure.
are the author here. I wrote about this.
I mean, the argument about it being recession-proof is just like patently false. I mean, the first thing that is important, just to underline what Artie said, is like, first of all, they don't even necessarily bring the economic development that's promised, right? And you just
Yeah.
have to look to the other three counties that have built federal prisons in the
I mean,
last few
Martin
decades.
County, yeah.
Martin, McCreary, and Clay, and they remain
Isn't
three of
Mer-
the poorest counties. And one of the
McCreary's
poorest
still the
congressional
poorest,
districts.
I do believe.
Yeah. So that argument falls on its face. But I do think it's important to address the question of recession-proof, because there is this argument, which is understandable, right? Like, if this is not the equivalent of a factory, let's say, which can pack up and ship jobs overseas,
Right.
then it's understandable that people might turn to it. But the thing is
Boy,
that
when you put it that
incarceration
way.
incarceration is not a static thing, right?
Right.
Like state and federal government policies that lead to criminalization and incarceration change.
Absolutely.
Right? So all
yeah.
these rural counties in New York, let's say,
Right.
as one concrete example, that in some ways resemble Eastern Kentucky, just
Right.
demographically,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
economics and whatnot.
A lot of people don't know that northern parts of New York are similar in terrain
Totally.
and
Yeah.
economic outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A bunch of them built prisons in the 1990s, and then a bunch of those prisons closed.
Yeah.
And then those counties that had attached their economies and futures to the prison were sort of left in the lurch a little bit. So the idea that the prison is just going to stay there with like a steady supply of people it's just erroneous. Like, that doesn't necessarily happen.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in Kentucky at all.
Right.
Prison populations are not stable.
Right. So I fully agree and co-sign what Artie said. Like, I don't blame people for looking to something, anything, right, to try and fill some of the footprint left by Cole's departure. Yeah, but we have to be honest about what this is going to do and on whose back it's going to do it.
Nobody's even talking about a factory. Like, that's not even discussed. Like, nobody's talking about doing anything positive. This is
well, and there are some positive things happening. I was at a meeting just last week where some local people have actually made some pretty significant progress toward looking at economic development and mainly focused on tourism, because there's some really beautiful areas there. And like in my part of the county, there are two of the three buildings in the county that are on the National Register of Historic Places are in the Blackie area, and some other historic buildings that are from the old mission settlement schools that really made a difference in people's lives, which would be a great kind of a historic tour. So I'm really encouraged that people are looking at that and garnering some dollars to develop these areas. In fact, there's one area called Raven Rock, which is near Jenkins, that fortunately never had coal under it, so it was never strip mined. So I think if we can just hold on and be creative.
Yeah.
We don't have to just knee-jerk grab a prison just because some legislators saying, here I can garner these funds from my buddies with the Pork Barrel Project and get it to you, and then folks are just like locking in on that and justifying it, when actually it really is a symptom of a whole national problem that we have. A huge racial problem that we have. Yeah. African Americans make up 13% of the national population. Right. Yeah. They make up 38% of the federal incarcerated population. And Letcher County has 0.7% African American. Yeah. So if this prison were built, there'd be almost 5 times the number of federally incarcerated African Americans there behind bars than the folks who are residents in the county, and that has such a horrible look. If we're really trying to progress as a society, and
we're choosing this as a society. We're choosing this over other choices. Like Michael Frazier was on his radio with us, and he said that Hal Rogers turned down broadband internet for this. So this isn't a zero-sum game. Like, it's not just like they could do they're actually giving up other priorities for this.
The other thing that I find so interesting is going back to the recesses of my childhood in southeastern Wisconsin. But my grandmother was one who really kind of wasted money and got obsessed with televangelists. And one of the big ones back in the day, his name was Creflo Dollar. And he bought a $1 billion jet. But he used to preach the prosperity gospel. Yeah. Which when I meet some of the... And it's really unfortunate. Like, I've met plenty of good people from Eastern Kentucky, too. But it seems like there's a lot of people who are looking for that prosperity gospel all the time out there. And it's almost like they're cheating their future, in a way, by looking for this short-term gain. It's, I mean, you see it all the time. Like, I've watched these old documentaries. We were talking about Apple Shop outside the studio. And I remember distinctly in one of them, when I first caught it, I think I was in college here in undergrad. I'm so old. I came back 10 years later and did my and I'm doing my master's now while working full time. But I remember seeing one, and in there, like, every person was like, well, I'm just waiting around and holding on here until the good times come back with the next coal run. And then I thought that was maybe they just recorded a couple of those people, right? But then I went out and I stayed in Hazard with a couple friends of mine. And like every third person I talked to said that. And I'm like, that is so backwards from the way I was raised. Like, you don't hold out for some better time in some dying industry. You find the next thing, you know?
Well, if you think about the fact that our area was endowed with all this coal,
right,
natural gas,
yeah,
oil,
And
it's
lumber
been-
back in the day.
And timber, yeah, and it's been ravaged for 150 years. And I
Yeah.
think people we've become somewhat inured to oppression. And I think this attitude of we're just going to push a prison in on these folks is part of, it feels a little bit to me like coal company oppression.
It's a similar thing. I mean, it's just you've traded one boss for another. Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think one of the things I feel like I've heard, I'm sure Artie has heard way more of this, but visiting, talking to people, being a part of the coalition, interviewing people for the book, you do hear about other ideas that come from the people. They're not necessarily coming from,
Right, yeah.
from the congressional representative.
Right.
But, you know, like since the floods, there's a group based in Letcher County, I'm not going to remember the name, that's looking at building housing up on some of the mountaintop removal sites that would
Right.
be above the floodplain.
Right.
And I guess we should say, maybe we said it already, the site for the proposed prison is itself 500 acres of mountaintop removal
Yeah.
land. So it's this
Right.
big flat expanse.
Yeah.
So
Right.
there are, so one example of something that that people are talking about that is not a prison would be building community housing up there, right?
Yeah.
One of the people that is a part of our coalition that I talked to extensively for the book, you know, and whose land is adjacent to the prison site, made the point to me. He's like, you know, this is a huge amount of land. We could do anything up here. We could
Right.
build anything.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of infrastructure and logistics infrastructure that comes into Eastern Kentucky
Yeah.
because
Right.
of coal, like
Right.
trains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could put anything on a train and have it be anywhere, at least on the eastern seaboard, within
Right.
a day. You know, and so there's an imagination there that like things could go there, could be different, you know, than a prison.
Well,
it's just
and-
that's what's kind of taking up a lot of the.
And I'm
oxygen
so
of the
glad
war.
you mentioned that, Judah, because what I think is possibly the most heartbreaking, crazy thing about this, right, is you talk about there's 500 acres that could be going to this jail, and they're talking about building houses. We have a housing crisis, right? Granted, my friends in Canada are suffering much worse than us. I don't know what they're going to do. It's terrible. They're like, I saw a thing where it was like in Niagara Falls in New York in Canada, and the house in Canada was 4 times as much and smaller, which is crazy. But anyway, I mean, that's what you're saying. Like, that's basically my friend we talked about. I had a friend who I did a podcast episode with from out there, and he called his podcast called Appalachian Underground, and he lives in Neon Fleming.
Oh.
So, and anyway, he pointed out, no, that's why I stay in Eastern Kentucky is I can work and do all these odd jobs, but my house was worth $20,000. Right? Of course, his got hit by the floods. But regardless, that's the thing, right? We have a housing crisis. People out there can do some things for work now with the internet, right?
I am not sure at all on making people live on strip mines because that is there's got to be some really serious toxic leftover.
But that is the other question, right?
Pulverizing the mountain.
We haven't talked about these
It's
environmental concerns.
I mean, is this are these the first prisons that have been built on strip mines, or has this been done before?
Martin County.
Martin County, both prisons in southwestern Virginia.
Yeah.
So right over the border from Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
They were built in the same year. They were both built on mountaintop removal sites in Wise County. One is called Red Onion, one is called Wallens Ridge. They're like notorious state prisons in southwestern Virginia. Those are both mountaintop removal sites.
Yeah.
Martin County, Letcher.
I mean, as
Would
I
be,
understand, Martin County already is a cancer cluster. But I mean, what are they drinking for water in Martin County?
Well, Martin County's had a lot of water problems.
Yes.
And I've been looking at their newspaper, Mountain Citizen, and looks to me like about half of the water they sanitize or whatever I'm thinking of goes to the prison. It's really siphoning off a big part of their water supply.
Oh gosh.
And they were promised water, but I think it at least initially went preferentially to the prison, and there's a lot of pressure required to get it up the mountain.
Right.
Those pipes weren't put in correctly, and so it breaks often. And so they really have had ongoing water problems. Purification is the word I'm looking for. I don't know if Letcher County will have that same problem, except that after the flood, we've been getting water from an adjoining county, not county. But just last week in the newspaper, there was a new thing saying that there might be a water plant built in the area near where the prison would be.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
I wonder
so-
who planted that article in there.
Yeah, so that's some new things. Like, we're always trying to watch and see what's going on, in the weeds here.
Yeah.
My bigger concern actually is that if this prison is built in Letcher County, is that it would have to have a freestanding sewer treatment plant just
Oof.
for the prison, and it would be near the river, which was heavily flooded back in July. And the functioning of a sewage treatment plant is totally based on the conscience of the manager. If this is built, it would be run by employees of the Letcher County Water District or additional employees from the Bureau of Prisons, would be yet to be determined. But if something's not done properly, well, even so, effluent chemicals would go into the river. And if it's flooded, then that would be an even more disturbing, and I'm
environmental
downriver
situation.
from that. So, yeah. So it's not just water; it's also wastewater.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't understand how you can put a prison on a mountaintop removal site, because I mean, you've got to be on.
Well,
really
yeah.
toxic
Do you have
fill,
any
right?
more comments on that,
Well,
Judah?
it's worth it to say that
Yeah.
there's a process required by federal environmental law, right, by the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA as we call it, that requires the Bureau of Prisons in this case to develop a whole environmental impact study and statement that then gets released, that actually our group is anticipating is going to come out in the next couple weeks. And then there's an open comment period where residents and organizations and whatnot can post comments, ask questions, point out inconsistencies. And it's worth saying that when this prison was proposed the first time, which was 2015, there was this multi-year long fight, 2015 to 2019 or so, the Bureau of Prisons had to redo that environmental impact study 5 times, 4 or 5 times, primarily because of environmental concerns and their lack of attention to several. So we worked with a bunch of environmental lawyers and activists who, would contract with, like, let's say, a bat specialist who would go on site and find out that, yes, in fact, were a prison to be built here, it would negatively harm the habitat of the Indiana bat. Or there's the Lily Cornet Woods old growth forest is, I don't know, a mile and a half away,
Yeah.
something like that.
There's old growth forest near there.
The Lily Cornet Woods, owned by Eastern Kentucky University, which is it the only old growth stand in Eastern Kentucky? that's left?
Harlan County has Blanton Forest.
Oh, that's right.
So,
Yeah. Wow.
One of just a couple,
Yeah.
and that's very close to
That's
the prison
incredibly
site.
precious.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a lot of environmental concerns. We'll have another chance to address them this time around, but it's worth saying, because I just think it's so arrogant,
Yeah.
that this was, lots of these concerns were raised when this prison was first proposed.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't satisfactorily address them.
Yeah.
They also, the Bureau of Prisons had to admit that their projections for, like, the economic impact of the prison were totally wrong.
Yeah.
And the prison was defeated
Yeah.
because of those issues, as well as lots of other things, like the declining federal prison population. And then just a few years later, right after the floods, they re-proposed it.
Right.
And we'll probably try and slide by a very similar looking environmental impact study, and we will have to, go through this process again. But it's
Yeah.
just like we're now almost 20 years from when the prison was first floated
Right.
by Hal Rogers' office to the local Letcher County Planning Commission. It's 20 years where we could have been doing many other things in Letcher County.
Well, and
Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought up that point, Judah, because this is the thing I think a lot of people miss when they talk about these local issues, is that if a certain group of special interests wants something to happen, it seems like they just can't take no for an answer, right? They will be darned. They will forge environmental studies. They will bring something up that's been voted down multiple times.
Yes.
And now you're telling me we're 20 years in. They're
Yeah.
still not done.
Well, and it's worth just to underline that point real quick. I don't even know if you realize how right you are. Like, the first time around when this was first proposed in 2015,
Yeah.
there was a fairly, I'm curious if you feel differently, Artie, but to me it seemed like there was a fairly coherent, like, block of support. It was,
Right.
the Bureau of Prisons, the Obama administration, DOJ, local political leaders, Hal Rogers' office. Everybody was kind of on board. This time around, I mean, every presidential administration since 2017 has asked for the rescinding of the funds, meaning has asked for the funds for the prison to be withdrawn.
Yeah.
That's both the Trump administration and the Biden administration.
Wow. We should write this down. This might be the only thing that those administrations
Right.
create.
Yeah. So you have this weird situation where the Bureau of Prisons itself basically doesn't want to build the prison, right? They're under the DOJ. So
Right,
it's like
yeah.
the DOJ budget is saying, let's pull this money out of this prison.
This doesn't make
But
sense.
they're also simultaneously pursuing it largely because of the influence, I think, of Hal Rogers
That
and maybe
is the
some local
story.
power brokers.
No, I've actually spoken to some local power brokers about this, and everybody says, we don't know why Hal Rogers wants this so badly. We don't get
Well, I
it.
think it's a kind of you'll have to wrench it out of my cold dead hand type thing. But so it is kind of mysterious of why hang on to this when there's so many other great things that could happen. Like the guy who Jude was talking about earlier, that chose not to let them use his land. They had to redraw their whole environmental impact
right.
statement. But he thinks there should be a wildlife center there. He rescues raptors. And I thought, you could have a wildlife training center there where you could have the rescue part.
Yeah.
There could be a training program aspect of it, educational for young people, and then there could be like an ecotourism thing that would tie in with what these other folks are doing.
Well, that gets into I've been dealing with that a lot lately.
Yeah.
Like, that's the problem with politics, is we could actually have anything we wanted to if we could
Yeah, because
convince anybody.
this is
But we can't.
$500 million,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
most expensive prison ever. But the other thing that's happened too, in an effort to not let any of those encumbrances that happened with the first time come up again, Hal Rogers has inserted this rider in the budget bill, Section 219, that says once it's passed, there won't be this National Environmental Policy Act process. The public will have no say-so. It will go straight into, within 30 days, a record of decision and construction and all that. And it also says that there can't be any legal redress of the building or operation of this prison. So
Really?
yeah, so there's that. It's sort of like the Mountain Valley Pipeline thing.
So that was put in. Are you saying that was put into the national budget?
Yes.
House
yeah.
Appropriations Bill.
Yeah,
Is
back
that
in the
one-
summer.
Is that the one that failed because of the Ukraine war tied to it?
It's
or-
still just bumping
Yeah,
along
yeah,
and Congress inefficiency and so forth. But
Well, decent chances of it never getting through, but still.
but still.
What were you going to say about the mountain? I'm sorry, the mountain pipeline.
Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is in West Virginia, where Joe mentioned attached it to the budget bill. No, some other legislation which may come to me, but it is to run a big natural gas pipeline through there,
Yeah.
and environmentalists feel like that would be very dangerous, but it has. And it would go through Virginia as well. It would restrict any lawsuits. So this is sort of language like that.
It seemed pretty clear to us, looking at the language,
Yeah.
this Section 219 that Artie's talking about, that Congressman Rogers just kind of cribbed it from Senator Manchin, which is so interesting, right? Taking, I mean, in some ways, it's I don't know, it's smart in a way. I mean, he's taking this language and this approach that Manchin used to push through a really contested infrastructure project and attached it to the prison as a way to push through a really contested infrastructure project.
Right.
And in the process, I mean, just to underline how fundamentally undemocratic this is, it would end judicial review of the project. It would stop the environmental impact statement public comment process, and yeah.
And
There's one
no
other
judicial
one.
review of the
And no-
operation.
Oh, that's right,
Yeah,
and no
yeah.
judicial review of the actual operations
Well,
of the prison.
and it also says in that 219 language that it would use the old environmental impact
That's right.
statement from the previous prison idea, and that was before the 2022
Before the
flood.
floods.
Yeah. And that was for, I mean, as I understand it, this used to be a maximum security prison, and now they've...
Now it's
Now it's a
medium.
medium.
I mean,
medium.
they're listening. They're paying attention because they're trying to
Correct.
answer everybody's
That's right.
objections.
That's exactly right.
But about this 219,
Yeah.
recently the Kentucky League of Women Voters I think the Lantern ran their story. They had done a study of the Kentucky legislature and found that the rate of fast-tracking bills has did you see that, has grown
just
exponentially?
skyrocketed. Yeah.
Like 25 years ago, maybe only 5% of bills were fast-tracked into law. And in 2022, I think 32% of House bills and 20-some% of Senate bills in the Kentucky legislature were fast-tracked, which means that not only does the public not have input, but often it's so fast that other legislators don't have time to read it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what this language is
came out
too.
against that recently,
Right.
like Maddox and a
Well,
few
and
others.
I'll point out, it seems like the only way stuff gets defeated now is a situation like what happened with this budget thing, where there was a group of, I don't know how many people in the House that said, we will not vote for another dollar to Israel or Ukraine, and that's the only reason it got killed.
Yeah.
That otherwise it would have gone again, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, I don't think it's dead yet. You said it's still bumping along, right? Yeah.
well, I
Well,
think
the
this
bu-
is separate things.
Yeah, the budget bill, the
Yeah.
Commerce, Justice, and Science budget bill, the appropriations, is, it got through the Rules Committee, but didn't get voted on, so they haven't actually voted on it yet.
So there's probably some
They may have
hang-up
to, they
from
may
putting
have to
it on
stay with
floor.
the 2023 budget, which would, 219 would not be in that, but
Yeah.
if they approve this 2024 budget, it could be. We actually were able to get one U.S. Representative, Alma Adams from North Carolina, to file an amendment, 124, to take 219 out of the budget bill.
Oh,
And 12 people, 12 other legislators agreed to co-sponsor it. All of them people of color, which I thought was very significant because I think they understand what federal prison systems do to people of color.
Yeah.
I also want to take a second to point out this. So here you are, you're a local resident of this county that will be impacted by this jail. You don't want this jail, and it seems like the majority, I would say a good portion of the population doesn't, enough that it was held up when they tried the first time.
Yeah.
And instead of your local congressperson listening to your concerns, you had to go out and find one from North Carolina merely to not even stop this, but merely to amend language that would fast-track construction.
While removing judicial review, which I would think the judiciary would have something to say about in the long run. But
Maybe, but they're probably counting on, it's already in the ground, too late now.
Well, and it
Yeah.
might be that even if 219 did go through, that the aspect of no judicial review of the operation of the prison could be contested, because that would mean that it's the only prison in the federal prison system for which employees or family members or incarcerated people have no judicial
Yeah,
review
I'm sure there'd be
if
some
there's a
pros.
wet floor and
yeah.
they slip, and whereas
Yeah.
75 miles down the road to the Manchester prison you would.
Yeah.
So I mean
yeah, they're really asking for it to become a
that
real
is
nightmare
so
facility.
preposterous.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But yeah, that shows, if anybody's under any type of impression that Hal Rogers cares about your opinion in the 5th district, I would take this example of and sure,
If you honestly think Hal Rogers cares what you think, please call us at 257.
in fact, I invite
WRFL.
Hal Rogers
Yeah.
himself to call into the radio station and tell
I-
me that he really is concerned about his constituents.
I don't know how popular this will be in this crowd, but I would say that Hal Rogers is probably mildly more in charge of his administration than Joe Biden is, but that guy's not. This is his staff,
Right.
right?
Oh no,
This
I
is his
mean,
staff. Do you think this is Hal Rogers personally doing
well,
this? or
I
do
don't
you
know.
think it's
I might push
I
back
do.
on that.
You
I
think-
actually do.
I would tend to
specifically him,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I do. I believe that. Yeah.
I can believe it because
Yeah.
that's what I'm hearing from a lot of people.
Yeah, I believe it's his pet project, and so that would be his 4th federal prison.
Are they all
in
named
the
after
5th
him?
district. Good question.
Well, it's so weird. Why would you want to be known as the person that built jails? I don't understand. That's very strange.
I've been dealing with this stuff for, Robin Kunkel. Robin Kunkel
yeah.
and I have been working on Winchester incarceration issues for a while, and it's really hard for me to get into the headspace of somebody who sees this as a decent way to make money. I have a very hard time understanding them, and I meet them all the time. They're decent people. They do good jobs. They honestly think this is a fit way to make money. They see this as civic profit, and I just
it's very
cannot
strange.
grok. Does not work for me. I mean, it's like, sorry.
Well,
Yeah.
it's really exponentially expensive. It is
Yeah.
much less expensive to invest in children and families and adolescents and education and those sorts of preventive programs than to, after the fact, try to help someone put their life back together.
Yeah. Or try to figure out to do with somebody who's just spent 20 years. I'm sorry. I
No,
interrupted,
no,
but yeah.
go ahead. You're right.
Well, I mean, it's like somebody spends 20 years in the back of Letcher County, like learning nothing, doing nothing, not able to afford a phone call,
Yeah.
and then they let them out. And where are they going to go? What's going to happen? It's not going to work
and that's
out.
and that's absolutely true. A lot of folks who are, well, I shouldn't say a lot. There
Yeah.
are folks whom I've seen who are incarcerated who were on disability, especially people with mental illness. I mean, that's my work.
Yeah.
And when they're incarcerated for a certain period of time, they lose their disability check. So then they finally get out, and they have no home. They may or may not be on medication for their schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever, and they have no income.
Yeah.
And it can take months and a lot of help, and they're ill,
Yeah.
to get that back. And so I think the question is, are our dollars being spent to really help people be healthier, or are we just kicking the can on down the road and being harsh and really authoritarian in a way that's not helping us in the long run? Like you said, it's sort of like we're sacrificing our future for some immediate
Yeah. We're a deeply dysfunctional nation, and we hate ourselves. Like, I don't think there's really any argument.
Well, there's a lot of violence, I think.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of violence all the way through, and I don't think we've ever really fixed that.
I think one of the things that this strikes me about, like, because we're here to talk about a big federal prison, but
Right.
I actually think, like, bringing up, let's say, the Clark County Jail is so crucial for people listening, because incarceration can be, it operates at all these different scales, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, we're fighting a federal prison, but almost every single one of the 3,000 counties in the United States has a jail.
Yeah.
Most of them are full or overcrowded.
Yeah.
And your city council or your county council or whatever is probably right now, like, planning for that jail's expansion or a new jail or whatever.
Yeah.
And part of what is so wild to me about it, I mean, you talking about it, Geoff, made me think of this, is like incarceration rates and the numbers of people that are, that we're projecting to go into jail are made up. Yeah. Like, I talk to different counties at different times, like, because I've written about this, where it's like consultants are projecting new jails for an incarcerated population in 2050, right? Ooh. And they're like, okay, we have 200 people in our jail now, so we need a jail for 400 people in 2050 because of incarceration growth. Or, sorry, because of population growth, anticipated population growth. And, like, that is bonkers. Like, crime rates or criminalization or whatever, like, that is, it's made up. Like, you can do things that would reduce the likelihood of somebody going into jail.
I would take it to the next level and say, that shouldn't be the goal of the criminal justice system.
That's exactly right. We should be working towards a community without a jail, right? Or with a much smaller jail footprint, right?
I feel like in Kentucky we actually have a sort of governmental space for this because we have elected jailers in all 120 counties.
Correct.
And I mean, like, I would, if I were the Letcher County jailer, which I'm not, obviously, I would be like, look, these are, I was elected by the people of this county to care for and to see after the moral rehabilitation of these individuals that my county has seen fit to incarcerate. That's my job. That's my sacred duty. And you putting all these prisoners in the county and not giving me any sort of say over them is deeply disruptive. Mm-hmm. I mean, I sort of wish, I like our jailer in Clark County a lot, but I sort of wish he would stand up on stuff like this and be like, look, my job is, I was put here for rehabilitation. I wasn't put here just to, like, sit on a box with a bunch of people and like try to make some money by like juggling numbers. Like, my job is to get these people out and get them rehabilitated, and I'd like to see more of that from Kentucky jailers.
I think one thing we did do in the Libertarian Party that I think we'd like to expand upon more of, but is something that's sort of along the same thread, is we held like seminars on constitutional sheriffing. Right? And we got, we got a sheriff from Arizona, not the one that people don't like, but a different, the one that's really constitutional.
He's been gone for a while now,
and he would come around and he'd just, explain this is what you can do as a sheriff, and believe it or not, you have so much more power than you think you have. And you can use it for good, and I think that's part of what you're talking about. it is a reform we may have to seek after with our jailers. You know, and I met one deputy jailer when I was in Hardin County that was sort of starting to push back on this a lot. You know, but you know, Hardin County has a lot more resources than some of the counties in eastern Kentucky.
Yeah.
But you know,
that's saying something.
and that's not saying Hardin County has a lot of resources, because it doesn't, but it has some.
Clark County's jailer he's a really decent guy. He really is serious about caring for the physical well-being of the people there, and he's pulling his hair out because he's inherited a job where he's expected to be profitable.
Right.
And he's trying to figure out how to make a jail profitable, and you can't.
Yeah, and our jailers are a really great guy as well in Letcher
Yeah.
County. But just a few months ago, there was an article in the paper in the Mountain Eagle saying that where the county judge said our biggest expense in Letcher County is the jail. It's like $1 million a year.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, and a lot of this, to your question about why are there so many jails and so forth, is in addition to 3 strikes you're out and mandatory minimum sentences and so forth, is that a lot of folks are kept in jail if they've to make their court date.
Oh well.
Yeah, that is
You know,
a
That's a
there's
huge
whole
some
other
of
problem.
that
issue.
as well.
And there was a
Yeah.
great thing I heard on NPR, like I think it was like 5 or 6, probably 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
But it was about this guy in Ohio, and eventually I think what's the civil rights lawyers?
ACLU?
Eventually the ACLU had to get involved, but it was a 20-year process where this guy, it started with like speeding tickets.
Oh, sure.
And they kept rearresting him because he couldn't pay, and he kept getting fired because they kept rearresting him.
Yeah.
And he just got stuck in this cycle for 20 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's just complete nonsense, because the man was no threat to anybody, and most people in the town, it was in Sandusky, Ohio,
Yeah.
and most people in the town even liked him. Like, he grew up there in high school with all those people. But
It's not about threat, it's about profit.
Right.
Like, these are...
Well, in Kentucky, a year or two ago, the Kentucky legislature passed Senate Bill 90, which allowed, it actually was a pilot project where I think 10 or 12 counties, the district judge could have some leeway in sentencing.
Yeah.
And if they had substance abuse issues, he or she could direct them toward treatment first. And if they successfully completed treatment, their record would be expunged, or they would not have to go do be imprisoned and so forth. So I think programs like that should really be expanded. And then a lot of folks who are in prison have drug problems. As we know, our national drug problem is really, really bad, and people are dying and so forth. And so in December of 2022, the DEA just said all providers need to be prescribing buprenorphine. So many people are dying. There were restrictions before. You could only have so many patients on it, or the clinic could only have so many patients. A lot of restrictions. And now they've just said so many people are dying from opiates, especially fentanyl, that we want this drug to be used widely to save lives. And so I just feel like, rather than building a new prison, let's see what happens when we give Senate Bill 90 and more broader prescribing of buprenorphine, and see how that may affect who all ends up in the criminal justice system. Because if you can go to your doctor and get a prescription for a medication that helps you manage your opiate addiction, maybe you're not going to a dealer and you're not trading and selling and trafficking or whatever. And so I just think that more of that kind of work would really help our whole society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like,
1 minute till the hour break, heads up.
Oh, yeah. It's slightly childish, but, like, how do you feel when some frickin' cornbread dude just goes, well, if they don't want to be in jail, they shouldn't have committed crimes?
I'm glad you brought that up, because people ask me about that. And I think what I say is, you're assuming that the criminal justice system treats everybody equally.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm in the medical profession. I'm not in the criminal justice system, so maybe I shouldn't be critiquing them. However, if you're a wealthy white guy, we were talking about this before, you are more likely, or white woman for that matter, and you're wealthy, you're more likely to navigate the criminal justice system better than if you have low income, low education, mental illness, no resources. And so to say, well, they should just stay out of jail, that's assuming everybody starts with a level playing field. And we know that's just not true.
Yeah. It seems like an excuse to withhold empathy, honestly. Like, people
Absolutely.
are looking for a way
We'll
out.
expand on that just again in a second here.
And actually, excuse me.
You are listening to Radio Free Eskippakithiki. I am Siege the Day, better known as Charles Altendorf, the Libertarian Party of Kentucky chair. And Sebesta just walked out of the room. We are with we are with our guest today, Judah from Eastern Kentucky University. He has written a book, Building Communities, Not Prisons. Did I get that right?
The book's called Coal Cages Crisis, but
Okay.
the organization is called Building Community, Not
And
Prisons.
Artie Ann from Concerned Letcher Countyans. And we're talking today about opposition to a federal prison being built in Letcher County. So let's do our little hour break, because that's what FCC requires. So, and because we have some Eastern Kentucky folk with us, I'm going to do this JFK one if I can get it going, because you know how popular he still is out there to some people.
My fellow Americans, for the past few decades, we have been listening to WRFL Lexington continuously broadcast the best content known to man. Now, my scientists tell me that this concentration of unique and interesting music is not found anywhere else in nature and deserves careful scientific study. And that is why we are sending an auditory expedition to WRFL Lexington. We choose to listen to WRFL, not because it is easy, but because it is all the way to the left. Thank you.
The following program contains views, ideas, and opinions that have been produced by the host DJ and their guests and are not reflected.
I think I'm allergic to something in this room, because this is happening every time. I don't know, it's just like, I'm totally fine when I'm not here, and then when I come in and I sit down, I start sneezing. It's distracting. What can you do?
All right, we're back here, and right before we did our hour break, I think Geoff really hit at a very interesting question we should probably take a little more time on. But
Why are people mean? I really want to know, because people are mean.
well, we know we can probably get a good psychologist in on that one. But the over
We have one in the studio.
Fix it, because they're annoying me.
but this goes back to the central theme, right? You
Yeah.
do hear this a lot, and I mean I can see it now. We were talking before they came in today. I was telling them about my favorite Apple Shop documentary with some old guy talking about long-haired freaky people coming into Appalachia and trying to spread their communism. But there are these reactionaries. Let's say that there are definitely reactionaries.
Yeah.
Who will not oppose this jail being built because they will say, look at all the crime in society. We need to put these people away. But I don't think they realize who these prisoners actually are.
You know who I want to ask what they would think about this?
What?
Andrew Cooper Ryder.
Oh, boy.
We should invite him on the show. Do you know this guy, Cooper Ryder?
So he was a former treasurer of our district party before we dissolved our district parties. And then he left us for the Republicans. And I think I'm not mischaracterizing this, but our disagreement fundamentally started boiling down to this issue of drugs, because he believed that he was okay with marijuana, kind of, but nothing else. He believed that people who had drug addiction were not recoverable. Because
So what do you want to do, kill him? Because that's stupid.
well, and to be fair, I think it
That guy.
didn't come out of necessarily a bad place. Because he did halfway house somebody. He allowed somebody to come work for his cleaning business. That was a convicted felon, and they stole his vehicle.
Yeah.
But, that goes back to a thing which is very ironic because he always claimed to be more of the Christian than me. But that comes back to a fundamental moral thing, right? For me as a Christian, I can't believe that somebody is always beyond saving. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so,
a good point. That's one of my favorite things about the religion.
Right, so it was
Jesus would just let him steal the other work truck.
That's right.
right.
Well, and that brings up a good point,
right.
Charles. Representative Hal Rogers has also, over the decades, really focused on, in addition to prisons, has really focused on drug addiction. And he has Project Unite, which is an excellent program. It ties drug court and therapy and that kind of thing. However, here's the problem with it. It pays for one free stint in rehab. And most people with addiction, this is a chronic, relapsing, highly fatal mental illness that usually isn't fixed by one stay in rehab. And so that's, I think, a real shortcoming of Project Unite. It should have funding for people to have many more than one stint in rehab. So I think that's a great point. People with addiction, more and more research is showing that there's a different brain there. It reacts differently to chemicals, and it's not just a lifestyle choice.
Would you like to hear the full cynicism of the libertarian on addiction?
Sure.
At all times.
There's just some addictions that are legal and some that are not.
Yes, well said.
Yeah. Any one of us can go over to Red Mile right now and blow all of our money, and we won't go to jail for it.
On the dumbest kind of horse racing. Harness racing is
or any one of us can drink 10 cups of coffee, and we won't go to jail for it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were to come and light a marijuana cigarette right now and do it live on the air, which I am not, don't send the police, we would go to jail for it. So it's just completely bonkers. Bonkers.
No, I mean, we all live in Kentucky, and I assume, therefore, we've all lost lots of people to addiction. That's totally normal. And I think I came to the same conclusion as everybody, because we all looked at it and we're all like, what do you do to fix this? How do you make their lives worth living? Because that's really what's missing. It's not that one drug being illegal or not legal is going to help. It's that they're unhappy and they're frustrated and they don't have anything to do with their life.
Most people in the throes of addiction are not having fun.
No.
Right.
They just don't know how to get out. But other countries, some other countries...
Portugal is the one we talk about.
That's right. Portugal in particular, where they incarcerate, a fraction of what we do.
Yeah.
They also decriminalize. It's still a problem, and you still have to go get treatment, but you don't go to jail when you have this disease, mental illness, this brain disease.
Yeah.
Well, and this is the thing that gets me
unless
too.
you're trafficking.
It's also like this thing that I have with drunk driving laws, which don't get me wrong, drunk driving is bad. But the thing is why are we focusing on the crime of the substance being used and not the actual crime they have committed, right?
Yeah.
So, for instance, just because someone smokes a joint doesn't mean they're going to rob you. Just because someone shoots up heroin doesn't mean they're going to rob you. But yes, if they did steal from you, that is a crime. And that needs to be addressed. But does it need to be? Do we need? It's like Sebesta was saying, that they don't just throw one charge at you.
Never.
They throw 5 charges at that. That's ridiculous, right? The crime with what happened to Cooper Ryder was the person stole his truck.
Yeah.
That should be the crime that was prosecuted.
I would say 2 things about that too. One is that there's a long history. I don't want to pick on this guy. I don't even know who he is. But
Go ahead.
there is a long history at the
He's
level
well
of
known.
big policy of
Right.
people taking one thing that's happened to them, sometimes something awful.
Yeah. Oh
right?
no, it's
And
I completely
abstracting
understand why it bothered you.
abstracting it into a whole political worldview or set of policies, right?
Right.
It was an awful kidnapping and murder that led to 3 strikes laws, right?
Yep.
This horrible thing that helped build out the sort of capacity of mass incarceration. So there's that. The other thing that I think Artie Ann spoke to before is even if there is the behavior that maybe comes from addiction and that behavior does violate the law, in addition to piling on charges, putting that person in jail. I get the impulse, right? That's what we do. But putting that person in jail or prison or whatever almost never actually addresses the larger issues or root causes of what led to that crime in the first place. Even if it's not addiction, right? Even if it's something else or poverty or whatever.
Well,
it usually
some people
winds
are
up
addicted to stealing. I mean, that was what happened with Winona Ryder, right? She was addicted to shoplifting.
Oh, yeah, or that basketball player.
Yeah.
Rick.
Like kleptomania, you mean, which is a different kind of mental
Yeah.
illness,
Yeah.
an impulse control disorder rather than.
But yeah,
actual addiction.
that's the thing I'm just trying to get. It's funny because we'll take somebody, right, who maybe, let's say a 16-year-old randomly steals from a gas station. Most of the time, they won't throw them in prison for that, right? They'll give them a chance to rehabilitate. But if that 16-year-old had a joint on them when it happened, maybe they do throw them in prison, which is just insane. It's.
I think it also depends on what 16-year-old we're talking about, what neighborhood they're in, if they have prior records, what they look like, what they're wearing.
Straight ahead profitability issue.
Yeah.
It really is that simple. Is this 16-year-old more profitable to keep in jail, or are they or will it cost me more effort and time to just let them go?
Or who do they have in their in their court. I mean, not court, but in their
quarter.
yeah, in
Yeah.
their corner.
Who do
yeah,
they
in their
know?
corner.
Who are
Yeah,
they
who do
connected
they
to?
have there to support them?
Yeah.
And a lot of times these folks have nobody.
Right.
And that's when they end up sort of being perpetually in the system.
Yeah.
Versus if you have your parents come stomping in and say, "Listen, kid, you're going to therapy,
Yeah.
and we're going to be monitoring you because we love you."
Yeah.
Some kids don't have that.
Yeah.
Well, I should point out, unfortunately,
the-
that's not new. I mean, this has been going on since even the Middle Ages, or since.
No, but the amount of orphaned children in Kentucky right now is just some stunning number.
Oh, it's
and I'm
terrible.
wondering what the orphan to pipeline percentage is like. It's probably got to be pretty high. I mean, like,
Oh, yeah, well,
my
my-
daughter's in school with so many orphans. I've never like that.
Well,
is not how
one
it's
of my
supposed to be.
friends is one of
Yeah.
my closest friends is one of the perfect examples of
Yeah.
this. His mother was a drug addict, and his father left for Mexico
Yeah.
and was from Mexico.
Yeah.
And so he, very young age, got fostered, and for a long time he had to live in an orphanage in Danville, and he went through tons of struggles,
Yeah.
and was just lucky that he was just barely able to keep it together enough that he got the scholarship to Berea and managed to have a life for himself. But all of his other siblings,
Yeah.
he can't even associate with it anymore because they're such criminals.
Yeah.
Like, he gets calls from, like, I'll be even hanging out with him.
Yeah.
We have a good time, and he's like, my brother's trying to call me again for bail money or for any
Yeah.
number of things, you
Yeah.
know, and it's like you said, it's a real crime. You know,
Well,
it's a
and
shame.
when people have a lot of trauma during their formative years, then their psyche doesn't really get stable. They don't learn how to really interact productively with other people, with the system, like holding down a job, staying in school, because they've had trauma. Childhood trauma actually sort of rewires the brain, and
Yeah.
people are very vulnerable
Yeah.
to further insults.
Yes. Especially sexual trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and neglect may actually be even more
There's
traumatizing than that.
There's a congressional candidate in our district right now who's one of her best lines is that America is traumatizing people faster than the therapists can heal them. And so, I mean, yeah, it's absolutely true. And I mean, honesty demands that I point this out, but this is very much my opinion. I think Charles agrees with me a little bit here, but like, this was not just a thing that happened. The American war on drugs was a frontal assault on the people of this country. They were selling them the drugs at the same time that they were putting people in jail. Just to pick a random example, the percentage of black families that had a father in the household was exactly the same for black families and white families until the war on drugs. And then they went through and they specifically incarcerated as many black men as they possibly could. Like these are, you know, it's not raining. Somebody's, you know, down our back. I'm being more careful now, as you can see. There is a level of malice here. There's direct malice here. There's an attempt to turn human beings into profit. And I don't know how to respond to that, but I feel like it has to be called out directly.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's always profit or if it's just some sort of need to control, need to exert force, need to maybe a fair amount of racism there too, maybe, and classism. If we can segregate those people, if I can stay in my gated community and I'll be safe. If the bad people are over here, you know, it's us and them, and it just carried to an extreme.
And we have to
now
remember
that's
the war on
pathological.
drugs came around in perhaps the most one of the most moralist times in this country, where, you know, Nancy Reagan thought she was on a crusade to save the world, you know, of its ills.
But it also predates the Reagans. I mean, you actually have a Nixon
That's true, the
staff
Nixon
member
member.
on record saying we couldn't say black people, so we
Right.
talked about drugs.
Exactly.
And,
Right?
and
I
Nixon
mean,
was
like,
also a moral crusader as well.
true, yeah.
To a
but
certain degree,
Yeah.
yeah. But no, you're absolutely right. That's what they said, and that's what they did, and that's exactly what happened.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it
now
was
it's-
also, I mean, let's also be
Frankenstein.
real. It was part of a response to uprisings in the 1960s,
Yes.
including in prisons,
Actually,
right?
I'll do you one better. Do you know why one of the main reasons temperance came in back in the 1920s was because they were worried about all the labor organization that was going on in bars. You probably knew that. You probably wrote a book about it already.
I have not.
He said,
But it's a great point.
Not
But
this
yeah,
exactly.
time.
It's
Not
the
this
drugs
time.
that people choose to has always been a reliable identifier for the government to pick off that group and persecute them. And now it's just gotten the combination of mechanization and getting trapped in these bad patterns has gotten completely out of control. Where like people don't really like what is it? A pandemic starts at 1%. Like if you treated this like an epidemic, or we're way past the pandemic stage on incarceration in America. Like this is killing. Yeah, I mean actually this is
well,
killing.
and what's
Yeah.
really unfortunate, I think, what this
Yeah.
all boils down to is, at some point, we talk a lot about when we have our safety training at my employer. We talk about the point of intervention, and the point of intervention, unfortunately, for a lot of people, comes when it affects them personally.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, any point in time, like, the 90s, we could have not passed that crime bill. The 80s, we could not
Oh,
have
the one that
targeted
Biden
everyone
wrote?
over crack. It's
that one.
Yeah,
but
well,
now here we are, full blown and we're almost to a place where we can barely reel it back to the point that
yeah.
our esteemed guest here, she had to go get a congressperson from North Carolina to try and take out a fast track thing that was written in a budget bill.
And she's a really amazing lady, Alma Adams.
Yeah.
I can't remember, maybe, I don't remember what area of North Carolina she represents, but she has a PhD. She always wears hats. She's got hundreds of hats, and she's a humanitarian. And I just think that we get caught up sometimes either because of our religious beliefs or our own past that we don't want to ever deal with, that we're trying to section off and compartmentalize, or because of fear, because of our own trauma. There are many reasons why we decide that I'm right and you're wrong,
Yeah.
and I'm in power, therefore you have to do what I say. And I mean, I know that's a gross oversimplification, but
No, it's true.
I also wanted to mention something. You said something a while ago, Charles, that made me think about something. This thing about one of the big arguments by people who are proponents of this prison is that we don't need outsiders coming in telling us what to do. And people who are in a bigger coalition would be considered outsiders, and we don't need them. And I think that's also, in addition to saying, well, this is recession-proof and all these other cliches,
Yeah.
is that that when outsiders, someone actually told me this since I've been involved in this opposition, that when outsiders come in and try to rescue us, it doesn't work out very well. However, when the flood happened, we accepted tons of outside help.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was okay. That was allowed.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point is they want the outside money for the prison. So
That's right.
obviously
Plus, if the prison's built, most of those 300 workers are going to be from the outside, because there may be a few local people who already work in a prison who could just step right in and do that job, but not 300. So we're sort of people are selective about who they define to be outsiders and who they don't.
That is a very classic psychological experiment, right? Wasn't that the one they did on the high schoolers where they all had them wear the different colored shirts to see if they would segregate themselves, and of course they did.
Yeah, I'm
Oh, that's
sure,
amazing. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
But yeah, that's hilarious. The outsiders, as if the money isn't coming from the outside.
And the coal company.
Well, and the people, right? I mean, it's a federal prison,
Right.
That's
so I
right.
mean, it
It's
implicates
everybody.
everybody.
It
But
affects
the
everybody.
1,400 people who would be incarcerated there,
Right.
I would venture to guess almost none of them would actually be from Letcher County,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, so
No, I
we're
mean,
talking about
Or the one
vast
that wrote
Letcher
country
County
song about
constituency.
would be.
Yeah,
but,
right.
Exactly.
And the coal companies were all from
We're all from
almost
outside.
all.
Yeah,
at least
that's
initially
right.
were
That
they were
was the
big
most
names.
Yeah.
hilarious
Well, they don't
one
have
in
to pay.
hindsight.
They don't have to pay for the cancer cluster if they manage to put a
It's
prison
true.
on top of it. That's probably
That's-
part of it. Now that I think about it too.
Who knows?
I mean, because if they've passed all these laws where there's no legal recourse, then they are not going to have to deal with a lawsuit in 30 years. I'm sorry, I'm not an environmentalist, but they're all going to get cancer. If you're on a strip mine site, you're going to get cancer. I'm sorry. There's heavy metals everywhere.
Yeah, well, and there certainly are documented health risks and mental health risks when people live near an active strip
Where
mine.
I was
Yeah.
going to
Yeah,
say that,
yeah.
yeah. One of the things that folks have pointed out with this particular prison in Roxana is there is an active mine not even a mile up the road, right on the other side of the river, I think, if memory serves. So even though the site at which the prison would be built has not seen active mining for probably several decades, I think it was stripped in the 1980s, there is an active site just up the road. And there are cases, some folks that we work with who are part of a really fantastic law firm called the Abolitionist Law Center that does a lot of this sort of work, is really an active part of our coalition. They were the attorneys on a suit in Pennsylvania in the anthracite coal fields, where there was, again, a prison built on or adjacent to a coal ash site, and there were people who were incarcerated who were getting sick.
Yeah.
You know, from coal being stored or processed or whatever, literally next door. So you're not wrong.
No,
right?
I mean, it's, okay, I've never seen the site, but as I understand it, mines go down. So that means that either this is sitting in the middle of a bedrock bowl in a giant flood risk area, or it's sitting on top of the nastiest overburden imaginable that's been stripped for coal and just thrown back on the ground in unamalgamated dust. There's no way.
Well, the Hazard Hospital is built on an old strip job.
Yeah.
And the Hazard Psychiatric Center and a bunch of buildings there. I don't know if there have been bona fide health risks connected with it or not, because so.
A hospital, there's a difference of intention because hospital A cares,
True.
B wants you to get better, C you go home occasionally.
Well, I would,
You know?
I would
Radon.
argue about the wants you get.
Radon should be a real concern. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
So grim. Is
Are
this
you-
the
are you
most
fully
depressing show we've ever done?
Are you fully depressed now?
Well,
I get
let's
depressed every show,
Yeah,
but like,
but
dang.
just to underline it, right? You
Yeah.
have us here because we're part of like a very, I would say, substantial, internally coherent, like body of opposition. So yes, it is depressing, and it's
You're
depressing
clearly
on-
having some sort of impact, it appears.
Well, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
a coalition that's like, I mean, there's a lot of people in concerned Letcher County. It's people on the ground in Letcher County where this is being proposed.
Yeah.
There's others of us who are from within the state, right?
Yeah.
And within the region of Central Appalachia. And then we should also say there's people in our coalition, and I mean like very active people in all the meetings, who are from all over, right? I mean, D.C., Chicago, Boston,
New Orleans.
yes, absolutely, New Orleans, who are really in the fight, and so it's like substantial opposition.
I mean, thank God, and I mean, thank you all for what you do. I sincerely
Well,
appreciate it.
another thing too that's happened about the time that Representative Rogers inserted 219 in the budget bill last year, which was July. Before that, in June, our local group had a public meeting with his Southeast representative, and 24 people came, and we just brought up all kinds of logical, documented reasons that this is a bad idea. And so about 4 weeks after that is when he inserted, about 5 weeks after that is when he inserted 219 into the budget bill.
Yeah.
Whether it's just temporally related or not, or causally, I don't know.
Yeah.
But then a week after he inserted that in the budget bill, the Bureau of Prisons had basically a secret meeting with the proponents of the prison in Letcher County. None of us knew about this. And then in November, a group of people with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth went up to D.C. and did some in-person lobbying. And a week or two after that, the Bureau of Prisons had another private meeting with this local group that is a proponent of the prison, also unbeknownst to any of us. And one of the folks in our local group who really stays on top of what's on the BOP's website found this information. And so we contacted the BOP and said, hey, you met with this citizens group, why don't you meet with us?
Yeah.
And they refused to do that.
I'm just going to underline something. The group that they'd met with is not like an elected body. It's not an official body, right?
Yeah.
It happens to be a quasi-public, quasi-private group of people who are the longtime proponents of the prison and clearly have the ear of the BOP, but like on paper, there's no difference between them being a part of a meeting and Artie Ann's Concerned Letcher Countyans group.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's
Outrageous.
the thing, though, right? I mean, the secret meeting trick is always one of the fun ones, right? You know, it's just like, when there was some things I was against that were happening in 2020, of course, a lot of those were happening in secret meetings, right? And then we found one and posted it on our website, and people were like, they really said that? I was like, yeah, they absolutely said that. That's why you didn't find out about it. That's what they think of you when the doors are shut and the cameras aren't on.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah, because the way this kind of thing happens is if there's no local opposition or national opposition, and so squelching the opposition.
They don't want people to
It's
look.
part of the
They
effort.
don't want it to look like it exists.
That's
I
right.
guess in a way it's a compliment that they have to cheat you.
I guess.
They can't do it
You
without
you have
That's probably true.
earned the right to be cheated.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what does it say? Hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue.
Oh,
You know, and that's all you get. You just that's what you get.
That's-
Hypocrisy. That's we're done. I mean, like that's
no,
that's your complete package. But that's what you get. You got the
I
hypocrisy.
think I will say
Well
this
said.
though. I think
Yeah.
hopefully we have seen here. You've said that the Bureau of Prisons, I think, is really starting to weigh the financial cost of this and how badly they want to do this.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
Yeah.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say there was this really interesting moment of political theater the first time around,
Yeah.
whereby you had might have been a House Judiciary Committee meeting. They had Rod Rosenstein testifying. Rod Rosenstein was the Deputy Attorney General under Jeff Sessions in the Trump administration.
Okay.
It was the Appropriations Committee.
It was Appropriations Committee. That's right. And this was soon after the BOP had begun publicly saying they didn't want to build a prison. Or maybe it was like the first time Trump had tried to withdraw the funds.
Yeah.
So you had this moment where Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein was explaining to Hal Rogers that the prison wasn't needed, that it was too costly, to your point, that the declining numbers of federal prisoners didn't justify it,
Right.
and that they could sort of address the potential population needs of overcrowded facilities by maybe adding on to an existing facility at much less cost.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is another issue we would need to organize around, but for the moment,
Right.
it's way different and arguably better than building a big new prison, right?
Right.
But you had Hal Rogers, of course, challenging him on the floor, saying the money was already appropriated to Congress. So there's this really interesting infra-Republican Party moment of disagreement. But it was one of those moments where all of this was public, where it was
Right.
like, wait a minute, this is totally, even by their own metrics and logics, it's not needed.
Yeah, pack it
You
in,
know?
Hal Rogers. Just build a water park or something.
Oh, really? Do
Well,
something
Water
good.
park would be
Well,
great.
Something good, yeah.
Hey, I'm glad you actually touched on that one, Jeff. This is the other
Water parks?
No.
I like them.
About the packing it in part. This is the
Yeah.
other thing that's really been, I think, really troubling for everyone in this country is how many very seasoned politicians we have that just they won't let things die, they won't let things go, they won't adapt with the times.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very interesting that the medical marijuana thing finally passed here, and Damon Thayer actually stepped down. It was very bizarre,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I had a personal gripe with him. I would rail on him several times in this show. Gateway drug, all this other stuff. All these other quotes. We
Yeah,
could
that
pull
guy.
up tons of quotes from that crazy guy. But here we are. This is clearly a thing with Hal Rogers. He's not willing to let go of power. And he's making this thing just like his signature thing, and it's just bizarre. It's so weird.
And it's not like it's the only thing he does, right? There's the SOAR program.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
if he really wanted to be known for a pet project, why isn't he trying to get his parkway expanded?
I think by the time you get into your 80s, being known for things isn't the issue that it used to be.
Right.
He's going to die soon, right?
Right.
He's the oldest person in the house, isn't he?
Certainly the longest serving.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's senior.
I mean, there's a few
and
people
there
in
was
the
some
90s,
we did a lot of lobbying with House and Senate staffers last fall, and before they went into their Christmas recess, one of the Senate staffers that we talked to said that this money is not going to be rescinded
Yeah.
as long as Hal's in the Congress. And there may be a way to delete 219 because it's so undemocratic and it sets such a bad precedent because basically Congress voted in NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, Nixon signed it in January of 1970, so 1969, which was Congress's effort to say the public deserves a right to have input with federal projects.
Yeah.
Right.
Both how they affect the environment, how they look, how they affect the communities and so forth. And
Yeah.
so by inserting 219, Rogers is basically going against what Congress set up
Yeah.
as a public protection.
Oh, I think if that actually does pass and become law, you are going to see quite a lawsuit.
Yeah, if I
Like
had
a-
any faith left, I'd say the judiciary would knock it down. But I don't.
I would.
so
I don't know. I mean, I think that might be a line that might actually be far enough that the Supreme Court might have trouble with that.
I
But
don't-
there are a few things they still have trouble with. Granted,
No,
they're getting smaller and smaller,
Yeah.
but there still are a few things that might be a line. But
You know,
As
I
to-
read the Dobbs decision. I would not put anything past these people. I really wouldn't.
Another thing I wanted to mention is that you know the I guess it's all online. The Hill, the
Yeah.
newspaper that's on top of what's happening in D.C. all the time.
yeah.
I guess in February of 23, February 23 last year, Hugh Hurwitz, who was the former interim director of the BOP when Trump was in office.
Yeah.
And let me say this before I forget. Trump wanted to rescind the money for this prison because he wanted to send it to the southern border.
Correct.
It
Right.
wasn't because he really thought the idea
Oh
was
yeah,
great.
no, nobody.
Well,
thought it
I
was
mean-
'cause
But
of the
Hal,
Southern
but Hal
border,
wouldn't
yeah.
even agree to that, and Trump's
Yeah.
his guy. Hal Rogers didn't even vote to accept the results of the 2020 election.
Mm-hmm.
So he is a true Trumper, but he wouldn't let Trump have this money
Yeah.
for this prison. But anyway, I wanted to mention Hugh Hurwitz. So he has this article in The Hill in February of 2023 in which he mentions this Letcher prison. And so he's a former insider who cast doubt on this prison. He said he compared it to renovating Leavenworth, which I guess is the oldest federal prison,
Right.
Yeah.
which already has infrastructure. And again, you can
Yeah.
debate whether that's a
It's
great
not on the
idea or
back of
not.
7 mountains,
That's
too.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. But so Hugh Hurwitz says in this article, and he's sort of subtle about it, but also clear. He says, conversely, this proposed prison in Letcher County, and again, this was just last year, would be extremely difficult to staff.
Yeah.
The area is rural. Its only businesses are a few service stations and some dollar stores.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the place. I live there.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
it's
But
my
yeah,
home.
yeah, but there's not a lot of people
But the
back
truth
there.
is the truth. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have currently a lot of the economic development that we need. But so here's Hugh Hurwitz saying publicly that this prison is a bad idea.
Right.
Yeah.
But none of this seems to really saturate
He's got his mind made
enough.
up.
He's got his mind made up. Yeah, I think this is four federal prisons are a big part of his claim to fame.
I mean, that leads to the larger issue, which is that at the end of the day, we don't live in Portugal. We live in Kentucky.
It's true,
Yeah.
but here's the other
Yeah.
thing that's really important, and that is the climate crisis.
Yeah.
And what happened with this flood in 2022?
Mm-hmm.
It was was recorded to have crested, and then the measuring stick broke to be at 22 feet when in the 1957 flood it crested at 16 feet.
Yeah.
So this was exponentially worse. 44 deaths in the region.
Yeah.
It was a federal disaster area. The
Yeah.
president came down. That's not going to go away.
Yeah.
And when you look at, it's actually 700 acres where this prison could be. If that were forested in hardwoods,
Yeah.
the carbon capture would be phenomenal.
Mhm.
And yet, conversely, to build a new concrete building
Yeah.
is very polluting. It emits
Yes.
a lot of greenhouse gases.
Mhm.
And so it may well be that somewhere in all this, as we look at what they say in the EIS, one of the truly grounded arguments is the climate crisis has hit eastern Kentucky. Because of our topography, we are flood prone. These folks who would be imprisoned there, incarcerated there, would be waterlocked.
Yeah.
That area was totally flooded. And so if there were a medical crisis, someone has a heart attack, and for 2 or 3 days, they can't get out,
Yeah.
then the Bureau of Prisons is responsible. Of course, if you can't sue because of 219, then,
Yeah.
I mean, the
That's-
scenario just
that's
goes on
lovely
and
from their
on.
point of view, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's
Oh my
it.
God,
I would
that's
argue
really
that's probably
upsetting,
what they
though.
want to do with the prisoners. But
I mean,
that's a
like,
very cynical view
to
as well.
incarcerate people, to like take them into the government's care
Yeah.
and then refuse all responsibility for their care is really horrifying. That's complete
Well, in
abdication.
the federal prison in Dublin, California, which was a women's prison, there was the warden, a chaplain, I think a couple of other staff people were convicted of sexually abusing
Yeah.
those women, and so the Bureau of Prisons has a lot of problems, and that's another big reason that
Yeah.
I'm so opposed to this prison is we're trying to get on our feet in Letcher County and recover from the vacuum left by the coal business, even though it was destroying the area environmentally. We don't need to have a facility that's being run by a group that's very dysfunctional.
Yeah.
The Bureau of Prisons can't really manage what they've got.
Yeah.
And we don't need that sort of administration coming in and trying to run something locally when they can't even manage
Yeah.
what they have nationally. And that's well established, that they have a lot of internal problems.
Well, it sounds like they're really setting this up to be like just a black hole. Like nobody can visit, no oversight.
That's right.
Like, there's
Yeah.
I don't see how it can function very well.
I would also just say that a lot of those same problems that you're naming that plague the BOP are problems not just with that agency, but it's just like, to me, it's like fundamental to the job of keeping people in cages, right? And of course, like there were just stories yesterday in the Herald Leader about almost daily for the last couple weeks about problems at juvenile facilities in the state and adult facilities in the state. These same kinds of problems: abuse, sexual assault, all that kind of stuff. There's a prison in Eastern Kentucky that was reopened in 2020 as a state prison. It was built by a private prison company. It was one of 3 private prisons operated in Kentucky. It's called Otter Creek. It's in Floyd County in Wheelwright. It's now called Southeastern Correctional Complex, and it's a state prison. That prison was closed as a private prison in 2012, in part because of a sex scandal. So, where guards were abusing women prisoners who were there, many of whom were from Hawaii. Point just being, this is something that is endemic, I think, to the practice of guarding people who are in these conditions of confinement. The other thing that we haven't said yet that I think has to be said that relates to that argument to me about the call for jobs in these places is that these are not the kinds of jobs you want your children in, right? And I'm saying this as somebody, I teach people who work in law enforcement and in other forms of criminal justice. It's not about them as people. But like, if you look at the social science literature, like correctional officers have higher rates of intimate partner violence, of mental health problems, of substance abuse, of alcoholism, higher suicide rates. It is a tough job. It's not necessarily because it's just like violent all the time, but just like the mundanity of it, underpaid, violence, pressure, stress, like just all that kind of stuff.
Turning a blind eye to these things all day, like when you see what's going on and why people are in there, like it's intensely corrosive to your
And understaffing is also a huge problem. And like in Bureau of Prisons, what they do is have extended shifts, and then also this thing called augmentation, where maybe a nurse or a social worker or a teacher or a cafeteria worker has to come over and work as a corrections officer because they don't have enough people. But back on the abuse part of this, there's such a power differential.
Yeah.
If I've got keys and I've got a weapon and you don't.
Yes.
And that also promotes part of the underground drug trade, too, in prisons, because folks with addiction are either not treated at all or undertreated, and I'm talking about in federal prisons. Then there gets to be this underground process of doing favors or whatever to get the drug that you need because you don't know how to deal with your issue. And I think it was from 2019 to 2021, during that period, the Bureau of Prisons, it was reported that they, across the country administered Narcan 600 times. So there were like 49 deaths during that period from overdose. And while you can't say that they were all absolutely from opiates, they could have been from meth or other things, but they administered Narcan 600 times in that 3-year period. So this is a big problem. And that also makes someone vulnerable to abuse, manipulation. They're ill, so.
Yeah.
No, it's a spiral. And I
Yeah.
mean, like, I happen to believe very strongly in the Stanford prison experiment. Like, I think that when you give people power and lack of oversight over other people, it goes wrong about as fast as if you take your hands off the steering wheel and just let the car drive itself. Like, there's no space at all between the problem and the heart. It happens immediately.
Well, it's sort of that slavery mentality, which
Yeah.
is about as, I mean, that's as
Yeah.
toxic as humans can behave.
Yeah.
And, you know, that went on for 400 years, and now we've just got 150 or 60 years where, a lot of variations of it are happening. And that's why this Abolitionist Law Center is trying to look at how prisons are like that.
Thank you for mentioning that, because one of the things that people are talking about right now is prison labor. Do they intend to make these prisoners work?
They can be. You can probably answer this. They can. They're. I think they're supposed to work if they're able to physically. They get paid a minuscule amount.
Yeah, like $1 a day.
But if they're able to do like laundry work or cafeteria work or whatever, they're supposed to.
I think that's I'm so glad you said that. One of the common misunderstandings about prisoner labor is that they're all exploited by private companies to work as essentially like a slave labor force. It happens, but it's much rarer than I think people think, and more often than not, like much more often, they do precisely what Artie was saying, which is they essentially provide the maintenance, custodial function of maintaining their own custody, right? They're serving food and doing laundry and cleaning and all that kind of stuff, and being paid, if they're being paid at all, they're being paid pennies on the dollar or pennies per hour or whatever.
They could make them go work in the coal mines. They make it a lot more
It's happened.
cost-effective.
Yeah, I mean in other places.
Well,
Tennessee.
when slavery ended, then the law was that you couldn't make people work for nothing unless they were incarcerated.
Yep.
So then a lot of African American people got incarcerated.
To this
Became,
day.
you were incarcerated because.
Angelo was a plantation before, and it's a plantation now down in Louisiana.
Correct.
Yeah. Nothing changed on that one at all.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the weather today.
What's
Geoff.
some good news? What time is it? What time is it?
3:42.
About 3:45. It's
Okay,
3:42.
so seriously, like as Kentuckians, how do we deal with the other people in the state in order to get them to stop being like this? What do we do? How do we interact with people in a way that's effective? Because I'm tearing out my hair lately.
I mean, I guess I'd say a few things. I'd obviously want to hear what you have to say. I mean, to me, at this point, something like 1 in 30... There was a report that came out 5 years ago. It's dated now, but it was called 1 in 31, and that ratio was referring to the rate at which Americans are under some form of correctional supervision, incarceration, probation, parole. Other forms. So 1 in 31. So we all know one, if not many people who have been in jail, are on probation, parole, in prison, etc. So there's one way to answer your question is to say, like, this is actually an issue that affects everybody, right? Whether you know somebody or are close to somebody who's locked up, or whether your county is just proposing to build a big new jail or a prison or whatever. These are issues that affect all of us. It's your tax dollars, it's your tax base in your county, it's your revenue stream, etc. So this is not a marginal issue affecting only marginalized people, right? So that's one thing. And to me, it's also like there are some hard fundamental questions we have to ask ourselves that to me are so crucial, which is like the question of, does having more cops on the street or a big jail or putting all these people in jail actually make you safer?
Right, yeah.
The answer is, foundationally no.
Right.
But I think it's become so common sense to us to say, I mean, you said it an hour and a half ago, right? Like the idea of like, oh, what do you say to people? Say you do the crime, you do the time, right? It's become so common sense to say you commit a crime, you go to jail. I think we have to be asking these kind of like really crucial foundational questions, like why? And like, does that person going to jail actually make our community safer? Like, what happens when that person goes to jail? What happens to their family? You know, I think there have to be those kinds of questions in addition to the very like concrete material practices of just like, let's look at the budget. Like, this this like doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, and I've found that that's actually the most effective method is like telling people like, oh, that you can't afford this, and that always feels a little bit morally wrong and sort of silly to me because for me, it's not about the money at all. It's about that this is a fundamentally bad idea and a bad way to treat human beings.
Yes.
But if I can explain
100%,
to people, if I can explain to people, by the way, you know, the jail has never been profitable. That gets through to people in a way that really disturbs me because Kentucky has a problem with this. I've noticed we're seeing this is the longest we've made it without mentioning Israel for weeks. I've noticed with Palestine. Have you noticed that the Israel-Palestine issue is sort of getting centered on the left lately, and that it's sort of becoming a leftist issue to the point where I don't want to call out the specific group, but there's a group that wants to have a drag parade for Palestine on March 10th, which is the first day of Ramadan.
Oh my!
So that was their idea to help. And so I'm seeing this like get centered on the left a lot, and it worries me because Kentucky, this place specifically has a problem with like Lexington especially has a problem with I was going to do the right thing, but you asked me wrong, so now I'm just going to do the wrong thing. And I think that's a real Kentucky issue, and I don't know how to get around it.
Well, I think the thing we try to do with the marijuana movement here and our involvement with it is we really tried hard to put personal stories on it. You know, one of the most powerful things we did was we interviewed a man who was taking it for his glaucoma, and the state kept trying to take away his children. And, you know, playing that interview for someone radicalizes most people, I'd say.
Yeah.
So that's it. We have to just
stories. I mean, that's the argument, right? It's like telling stories, like data and stuff like that doesn't necessarily change people's minds.
And I absolutely keep like the data with you. Like, of course, I mean, obviously, I could go give you any number of data, but everybody's already seen the data and knows arresting people for marijuana is very silly, right? Sure. But when I say to people, no, the way the laws were written previously, if you went and told your counselor that you smoked marijuana and they knew you had kids, they could take your kids away from you.
Yeah.
That puts it in such a different way to people.
That's something that we don't really understand. It's just how stressful the war on drugs was for parents. Like,
and marijuana is still categorized by the DEA on the same level as heroin.
Drug. Yeah, I don't want to downplay that. Yeah.
Unless you go over to Ohio where it's perfectly legal now. But
but still, no, it's a great point. So with this jail thing, I think it does need to be something where it's personalized. Like I told you that story about that man who kept getting rearrested purely because he couldn't hold a job because they kept rearresting him. Yeah.
You know? I don't think I can hear you mention not having talked about Israel-Palestine without saying this. That I guess two things. One, I think it's important to center Palestine right now as Americans because of our unequivocal support and complicity, exactly, and just to name the genocide that's happening and our duty as Americans to stand up.
Yes.
But also, when it comes to the issue around which we're here today, mass incarceration, there's like concrete relationships between the Israeli military and particularly policing in the United States, maybe less so when it comes to incarceration. But just as one example, one other fight that's happening right now in the United States where there's some connections between our group and this group is down in Atlanta where they're fighting something that's called Cop City.
Yes, which
where they're looking to they're looking to
I finally read up on
raise about 80 to 100 acres of a forest in Atlanta to build this like massive police training center. Right. There is a program that is run out of Georgia State that partners annually with the Israeli occupation force and trains police with them. So it's not exactly a stretch to say that they're not the exact same issue, but there's a lot of kind of contiguities and relationships there that connect them.
Yeah. And I'm sorry. Okay, so how about this? I got to mention Jill Stein, and then we've talked over you like a couple times. So
I actually didn't have an
But
idea.
for those of you listening, Jill Stein is actually going to be here on Monday, March 4th. She's going to give a symposium here at UK from 4 to 6 o'clock, which is... you've got to contact them to go, and then she's going to go to Pivot Brewing from 8 to 11 for a meet and greet with the Ceasefire Candidates Coalition. So she is here specifically to support the Ceasefire Candidates Coalition, specifically to help us, because there's a lot of pro-Palestine groups in this area. and she's here specifically to help, to give us a little bit of oomph, I guess. So I'm profoundly grateful that she's showing up, even though like some people in Lexington are being a little bit goofy about it. But so yeah, that's on Monday at Pivot Brewing from 8 to 11, and everybody's welcome, of course. Okay, so yeah, I had to
He
mention
wrote
that.
it on his hand. He got it down.
Yeah, I'll just give you a flyer.
Yeah, give me fire. Thank you.
Here we go. And
right.
so, Dr. Artie Ann, would you like to give us the closing statement?
Yeah, you got 10 minutes. So.
Yeah, well, I think that we have to do an internal inspection.
Yeah.
We all have the potential to be Hitler, I guess, and we all have the potential to be some horrible person.
Yeah.
And so we have to do our own deconstructing of our sense of fear of other people who may be different. And we have to, for example, one of the people in our group is a woman who has 2 teenage grandsons. And she says, I'm opposed to this prison because I have grandsons and they're prone to do anything any other young boys would do. And I don't want them to be in a prison. Therefore, I have to fight this prison. Mm-hmm. And so we have to start with what's inside of us and then extrapolate it to our whole country, both what our country is doing in other places of supporting the murder of children and what's happening here at home. And so I think our own moral inventory is where we start with this. And also doing what's best for our planet. And I know that sounds sort of, pie in the sky, goofy, whatever. But the climate crisis is a real thing. Mm-hmm. And if we don't pay attention to that, just like what happened in 2022, our risk of that happening again is very, very high.
Yeah.
And so we have to make changes in our lifestyle. We have to make changes in the way we treat each other. And I think this prison is a symptom of all this.
Yeah.
It's just a reflection of what we need to be doing in terms of showing caring and kindness. And back on this thing about how people get out of how they emerge out of prison. I worked with sexually abused children for many, many, many years, and 98% of adult rapists get back out of prison. So are they going to get back out and be healthy, functioning people, or are they going to get back out and still be stuck in their same warped, sick brain behavior that doesn't do anybody any good? So I think we don't need more prisons. We need better prison systems that help people get better.
Yeah.
I think Derek Chauvin should be in prison.
Yeah.
I don't have empathy for him. Maybe someday I will. If he turns around and says, I did the wrong thing and I killed George Floyd and it was monstrous of me to do that. Right now, I'm okay with Derek Chauvin being behind bars.
Yeah.
Maybe that's callous of me, but I haven't gotten to a point where I can see a way through for him.
Yeah.
But not many people there are of that ilk.
Yeah.
Most people are really ill. So hopefully we can think about a peaceful way to deal with this instead of a violent way to deal with it.
I'm actually really glad you brought up Chauvin, because that's something that bothers me a lot, is that I am also glad that he is in jail. I think he belongs in jail. I think that the fact that he was allowed to come to harm in jail was a horrible mistake. And just terrible shame on all of America. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of ways. One is that it proves that we can't keep people safe.
Yeah.
Another is that it demonstrates to all cops in America that going to jail is a death sentence, because surviving getting stabbed 22 times doesn't sound like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So it leads to cops being more a cop who is mildly in the wrong is going to become massively in the wrong because they just do not want to go to jail. Yeah. And also it's it let us out. Like, everybody was like, oh, we'll put him in jail and some random poor person will take care of it. Like, that's really messed up.
That's messed up.
If our society wanted him dead, we would have killed him ourselves.
Yeah, and I think just the work that's being done to abolish the death penalty is a good thing, because I would like to believe that everybody could be rehabilitated. Maybe they can't. That's partly their choice, but we want to at least provide the framework in which it could potentially happen.
Yeah.
Or they could at least make some progress to having a sense of a conscience and restoration hope or whatever it is that they lost somewhere along the path in life.
I wish we had another hour because I'd really like to talk about rehabilitation because that's not what's discussed, and like I feel like that's like we're getting into the nuts and bolts on like what kind of concrete to use in one particular prison.
Right.
But rehabilitation's wide open because Americans don't even believe in it.
Well, one of the good things that Trump did, and I know we are almost done, was the First Step Act. That was a significant piece of legislation, and it's a merit-based early release, that kind of thing. But because the Bureau of Prisons is so understaffed, they don't have the staff to fulfill that program, to implement it in all these places. So, the more we can help people capitalize on whatever healthy psyche they have in there, the better for everybody.
And you raised one question that I wanted to ask you a while ago. I actually have two questions. One of them is directly related to that. If they do build this prison, will you be treating prisoners? Will you be going into the prison to treat people?
I'm actually semi-retired at this point, and so I work as a backup person for our nurse practitioners and our community mental health. So the Bureau of Prisons has their own people, but I'm assuming they might contract with some local agencies, which is part of why some local agencies have said, we'd like this prison because we'll get grant money and we can hire more people. But one of the big community mental health, one of the big family practice programs there that gets federal dollars, there was an article in the paper about them not long ago saying they can't get staff, and so they want the local community college to have some health training tracks. So if we're already not having enough people there to treat the folks we have, how are we going to treat 1,400?
Oh yeah, and if there's a disaster, what the heck are people going to do? Like you've only got 1,400 people in the whole county.
Yeah.
But anyway, and I do have one last question because you live there, and so maybe you can tell me. I've always wondered. The census happened in 2020 during the COVID, which is talk about catching a falling knife.
Yeah.
But then the floods happened in 2022. How much do you think the population of the 5th district has dropped since the floods?
I actually don't know. There are people who left and probably won't come back. And people who were displaced and living in tents for a while. And just a few months ago, our county judge said we need, I think it was 300 homes, 300 to 500. Yeah, 300 to 500 is what he said. And that's not just from the flood. So the flood just exacerbated problems that we already had. I don't know how many people left and didn't come back or can't come back or won't have a place to come to. I do know that there was talk about if there's a prison, there might be building of housing apartment complex for these people who would come in to work there.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we can't do that for the folks who got displaced by the flood.
Yeah.
Priorities.
Make a ghost prison. Seriously, maybe just tell Hal Rogers that there is a prison. Because he's not going to go check.
He's not going to go check.
Potemkin prison.
He's not going to go check.
Really, just build like a big concrete wall behind it.
Trust us.
Or a lot of trees.
That may be the answer.
I mean, sometimes you got to be smarter than people. Okay, are we out of time? The other DJ's here.
He's here, but we have like 2 minutes. Do you have a parting shot, Judah?
Oh, I mean, I co-sign everything Artie says. I guess I would say always.
This guy is so nice. Have you noticed this?
I mean, it's just great to partner with Artie. I'd say, I mean, whatever. We could talk through various things. I think the one thing I'd say maybe where we have a slightly different perspective on this is rather than thinking about the Bureau of Prisons as being understaffed, which there's one way to think about it where it is, right? I think what I would say, the slight reframing is to say there's just far too many people in prison.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
There's plenty of people who work there, right? We have plenty. Just get most of the people out.
There you go.
And I think
That'll
that's the
solve your
parting shot, right?
There
It's
you go. That's a good one.
we put far too many
You're about to get
people
me
in
fired
far
up,
too many
Judah.
prisons and jails for far too long.
Yeah.
You're about to get me fired.
Get them out. And I guess maybe the last thing I'd say is just if people are interested based on what we've talked about or whatever, you can find our group online. It's called Building Community, Not Prisons. We have a website. There's a Twitter account and a Facebook page. And also, look at what's happening in your communities and counties and see what's happening in your jail and your police department. These are issues that affect every county.
Yep. indeed.
Big shout out to Robin Kunkel for helping us set it
Oh
this
yeah,
up.
big shout out to
Yes,
Robin.
absolutely.
And Attica Scott, we wish you could have been here. And
Yes.
Hal Rogers, I'm sure you enjoyed the program. I didn't mean what I
You're
said.
still
always
get a shout out,
welcome to
though.
call
I'm sure
me.
live forever.
I don't know if you'd like what happened if you did, but you can.
I'm not angry at Hal Rogers. I mean, it's just a different world. It's just a different worldview.
Angry's the wrong term.
Yeah.
Fatigued with existence of people like him. That's
Yeah.
probably where I land.
That's a good way to look at it.
Thank
Okay.
you guys for having us.
Thank you.
Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome
Or may-
anytime.
or-
This is wonderful.
Or maybe it's time. Maybe just time for him to retire.
Maybe it's time
Yeah.
for him to retire.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
time for Artie Ann's
Well-
second career as a congressional.
It's a primary.
I know.
There's like, do you know anything about the other candidates in the primary?
They're only Republicans. There are no Democrats.
Yes,
We tried to find some people. One guy is from Clay County, where that prison is. He's a retired surgeon, Dana Edwards. So, but he's sort of presents.
Hal for the nomination.
Yeah, he is. There are a couple others besides him, but he seems a little bit more to the right than Hal, because he said he wants to be the representative from Kentucky who's on the Freedom Caucus.
Well, I mean, I would go for some freedom here. I have something very important to tell you all, actually. I remembered this during the show, but I will wait until we're away from the microphones. Let's get your lights, Tim. Did we get, both of them?
There we
Here
go.
we go.
Oh, what am I gonna play? I'm having a total brain lapse today.
So, I forgot to tell Micah about this. Because we rescheduled, I forgot to tell her about the reschedule.
The reschedule.
Slide by here.
You're probably fine now. You can just put something on after I do the ID.
After you do the ID, all right, knock yourself out. This mic's on right here. Look at my backpack behind you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.